It's not that extreme. So they're still doing it. Yeah.
We'll be starting in just 1 minute. So it's going to be Steve.
Yeah, this person used to do it, actually. Yeah. Yeah, switch. Even red.
Yes. We got it. We got it. All right.
You already.
Come on, give me a second. Oh, you know what? It's so new.
I think I have the same one. Oh, do you really? Now we have two.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming out on this cold, almost wintry evening. I just want to say I'm Meg Tyler, and I direct the poetry reading series here. And I am so happy to welcome Arrowsmith Press and these marvelous poets. Oh, it's flashing green. Hello? I don't think I should put it closer than that. Oh, there it is. Now. Oh. All right, so I'm Meg, and I direct the poetry reading series, but I'm going to hand this over to Oswald, who really is one of the nicest people to email. I have to say that because not everyone is kind. But Oswald is consistently kind and gracious. Over years and years of emails, there's always a bright ray of light when he sends me a message. Thank you.
It's only by email, Meg. In person, it's a whole different story. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. As always, before introducing our three readers, sorry, there's still some people coming in. I want to be sure that everybody gets a chance to grab a seat. As always, before starting, I have a number of thanks to give out, and the first is to our sponsor at Boston University's Katzenberg Center, the always kind, in-person, always generous Meg Tyler, who is as welcoming a host as any weary literary wanderer might wish for. Then a big thank you to my crew at Arrowsmith Press, who have outdone themselves this season, both on behalf of tonight's readers, but also with our earlier event, a memorial from Victoria Amelina. Thank you to Lada Stacevich, Natalia Shpilova-Said, Catherine Parnell, MP Carver, David Earle, Julia Juster, and for especially huge thanks to our, what's the title you go by, Ezra? Senior editor, Ezra Fox, whose manifold gifts include the transformation of eloquent words into elegant books. And I hope you get a chance to pick up several copies this evening. In a dark time, the eye begins to see, wrote Theodor Rilke. And we are surely in a dark time. The kind of period some of us hoped we'd left behind in the last century. Today, our thoughts and prayers are with all the innocents suffering violence at the hands of the ignorant. I was reminded of how easy it is to distill entire libraries of human wisdom by a Facebook post put up by my friend Julia Lieblich. It's a simple quote from Rabbi Hillel. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. For the last several years, I found myself turning more often than ever to poetry for those celebrated, all too brief sometimes, momentary stays against confusion, which Frost insisted it offers. I'm grateful to tonight's three readers for the hours of illumination their work has offered me over the last year. To assure that I don't break the spell cast by their words, I'm going to introduce all three readers at once, then turn it over to them. You'll find their bios in the programs. I'll read abbreviated versions of them. The program should be on everybody's seats. Our first reader this evening, Steven Cramer, may correct me. He often has in the past. But I believe I was his first editor when I published a long poem of his in the literary journal Ani back in 1973.
That sounds right.
50 years later, Arrowsmith proudly brings out Steven's seventh collection of poetry, Departures from Rilke. Over the years, since those days, Steven's poems have appeared in The Atlantic, the Paris Review, Plowshares Poetry, so many other journals, as well as a number of anthologies. He's received many awards from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and National Endowment for the Arts. Others are listed in the biography. Steven also founded and now teaches in the low residency MFA program at Lesley University in Cambridge. In Departures from Rilke, Cramer finds himself in dialogue with the work of one of the last century's most influential and haunting poets, Rainer Maria Rilke. I say haunting because Rilke's reach was always directed to those things which almost by definition resist our grasp. In his Departures, Cramer allows himself to go places Rilke could never have imagined by repurposing, updating, and sometimes upending the subject matter and style of the originals, offering glimpses of how Rilke's concerns strike one of our contemporaries. Cramer's approach makes for a poetry of personal and contemporary resonance, often startlingly so, as when the poet asks, in a poem slyly titled Lullaby, "How will you sleep when I'm dead?" After reading the book, you may well find yourselves asking, as I did, what would Rilke think? And did he really know Eric Clapton and Patty Boyd? Our second reader, Diane Mehta, came to us via Arrowsmith poet Thomas Sayers Ellis. Diane was born in Frankfurt, grew up in Bombay and New Jersey, studied in Boston, and now makes her home in New York City. She's the author of the poetry collection Forest with Castanets, as well as a poetics and style guide, How to Write Poetry, and the forthcoming essay collection, Happier Far. Her work's been recognized by numerous awards, and she's been a resident at Yaddo and Civittella Ranieri. She's the founding managing editor of Public Space, launched and edited Glossolalia for PEN America to publish writing from traditionally underrepresented languages, and was executive nonfiction editor of Guernica. An incandescent intelligence animates Mehta's poems as they zigzag in ways that feel dizzying yet whole and coherent, offering the delights of casually exquisitely forged epigrams. Quote,
Geez. I said, should I try it again? And we did this for about 3 months. Every morning, I would bring her the original, a Word Google translation, which were hilariously incoherent. And I thought, well, I can just stop there. And a stylistic, a version. 2 limitations were important as I developed this. One was every stanza had to shed a line's worth of wordage. I found the translations, good as they are, in English, slack. Metered English prose, generally. The other one was if there was an adjective and an adverb that could be transformed into a verb, do it. So that was very important. And the license, which Hillary really encouraged me to pursue more and more, and I'm taking too much license in talking, was to just go wherever the poem went. And as you'll hear, that's how I ended up in 60s London with Patti Smith. Patty Boyd, not Patti Smith, right. Eric, and yeah, okay. I'm going to start with a poem called The Prisoner. I only did the short ones. I did a very few of the religious ones because those felt inauthentic for me. This is actually a 3-part poem, and I did 2 parts and called one of them The Prisoner Part 1 and the other Prisoner Part 2. This is The Prisoner Part 2. Is this still on? Oop, I turned it off. What did I do? Get my back on. Okay. Imagine it. The air you breathe and the sun in your eyes start turning to stone, reaching your cell, touching your hands and heart. In you, then and later and tomorrow and next year and hereafter rankle into a reddening sore that stays inflamed. Your past crazes inside you. Its benign smile, never quite laughter, curdles in your mouth. And that guard playing God, a sooty eye leers in the peephole just to see you live. One of the things I discovered is how dark the new poems. These are all from the new poems, the 2 volumes of Rilke's lyrics that really sort of established him as a major poet. They get very visceral. I've made them sometimes more visceral, but the Rilke of wisdom literature is just gone in these poems by and large. I did do a parody of the archaic torso of Apollo, and the first editorial gift from Oscar was his telling me, "You're not including that." The other thing I found is that a number of the poems lent them. Rilke was not a particularly political poet, but a number of the poems lent themselves to being encouraged to confront the social world in a way that I think in the originals they don't do. And this is one of those. I don't remember actually the titles of a lot of the originals. This was not called, I think it was called The Square, and then it mentioned the city that it was in. I call it the town square. Oh, and a trompe-l'oeil is that sort of art optical illusion that looks 3-dimensional. That's not. I had to look that up on my phone earlier to remind myself that I wasn't wrong about that. The town square, built, obliterated, and then rebuilt by history, its uprisings, its crowds amassed for the latest quartering, its kiosks that peddle everything from Ammonites to grace to the weirder meats. It's demagogues on horseback or in limousines. Really, a trompe l'oeil. The town square always entreats. Look out your windows. All the while, agents and VIPs of unimportance take their front row seats, craning from their gables, doll-sized houses, silent, strained to see it all, their heads turned from the guard towers stationed behind them. And this is another one that I found it, as I worked on it, asking to be more current. I believe the original is called After the Fire. Mine is called Bomb Site. And at first I thought it was about war, and I realized no, it's about denial of war. Bomb Site. Morning ignores it. And who knows? The burnt lime trees and pitted block of flats might be fakes. So might that warm crater filling with kids, God knows from where, who play catch with the littlest one's shirt and stop to watch a tenant's eldest son poke under the crushed, incinerated deck, teasing out twin tea kettles in a washtub. He looks like he's acting too. For the kids, or anyone naive enough to think anyone lived here. Whatever remains is incredible as history now, where everyone's a stranger. Osgold mentioned lullaby, and that gives me a chance to read a love poem to my wife, who's also here. Oh, yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to read the electric guitar poem too. I'm glad you liked that one. And then I'll just read two more after that. Is that enough? Okay. Lullaby to Hillary. How will you sleep when I'm dead? Without my arms like linden branches creaking as my trunk twists, dreaming? Without my insomnia's wide-eyed rants, putting words in your mouth and over your breasts and between your legs? Without my sleep keeping watch, leaving you to oversee your garden, dense with its scent of anise and stars. Okay, three more quickly. They're all short. I did one long one, but I don't know. And I should also mention that I just did them in their order, and if it didn't feel like doing it, I didn't do it. So the order of this book is entirely without my premeditation or even conscious manipulation. Patty Boyd was married to George Harrison. They met on the set of The Hard Day's Night. Some of his most famous songs, Something and It's All Too Much, are love songs to her. And then Eric Clapton got involved and wrote an album called Layla and a song called Layla, dedicated to her. Another song he wrote to her was called Bell Bottom Blues, and he was nicknamed as Slow Hand. Their marriage didn't last either, but he's still around. There was a rumor going around that Patty Boyd was dead. It was in the on the internet, so it must have been true. But she's not. She's actually had a thriving career as a photographer. This is based on a poem of Rilke's called Lute, in which the lute talks to you. Electric guitar for Patty Boyd. Hollow body, solid body, archtop strat or flying V. My shape's a pitted avocado, a frying egg, yolk broken, or nearly any brock. My dark sounds utter hyperbole. as in Eric's bottleneck falsetto to his Layla, formerly George's something all too much, her gold ringlets bloating slow hands, bell-bottom jeans with blues. Plenty other muses teased voltage from my pickups, but the duende she awoke could play. Until, who knew whether I fed back through her or she through me. Two more. I'm sorry, three more, quickly. Is that it? Yes, three more. I have to read that last one for print. Huh? Okay, I don't want to, I hate taking too much time. You met those people that read too long, and then they say, I have one more poem, and it's very long. I don't. I have three more poems, and they're very short. The other thing that happened is the poems invited personal, familial subject matter. Again, not something. A Globe in 1999, when Ethan, who's here, I don't want to overly single you out, but he's here with his partner, Mitchie. But this was when he was under one, but old enough to crawl up and look at the world. Photograph of Ethan looking at a globe, 1999. We don't recall if he knew how to spin it. Afterwards, his profile might have turned, it's a photograph we have on our wall that we pass all the time. Okay, let me start again. We don't recall if he knew how to spin it. Afterwards, his profile might have turned to face us with his plump look of clarity, round as a watch, brief as an hour. Now, he barely has time to keep up with time, what with work, sex, the sleep both require. Do you, like me, sometimes stop to glimpse his fingers skimming across the North Atlantic, as though he had all the time in the world? Now, that's a cliche, that last line, but I appeal to Charles Simic, who said that the dream of every cliche is to end up in a good poem. You can decide whether you have passed the Simic rule. The last one I'll read is also an ekphrastic poem. My dear oldest friend Purnell, when we were 17 maybe, did a sketch of my face that she found years later and sent to me. Long hair, mustache. One person said I looked kind of like a serial killer. There's a reference here to just long hair like a girl's. And that's a term that people used back then. You look like a girl. So if it has a certain ring of disdain, it was meant to at the time. Pencil drawing of the poet, 1968, for Purnell Berkeley. Family history stiffens in the thick eyebrows. Childhood fears shadow the gray eyes. Long hair, like a girl's, looks foolish now, but he's no fool. And here and there, a scholar's diffidence. A fringe of mustache shades his narrow mouth, lips pursed, but quick to speak up if asked. The jaw's still a boy's jaw. His level gaze feels safer when allowed to look away. What's in store for this draft of lines and shading? Pain, of course, and joy. Maybe some work worth remembering. It sure looks like he's planning something.
Hello, thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming, Nick and Francesca, at the last minute. I'm thrilled to be here. I feel incredibly, hello, Garnett. I'm glad you made it. So I can't tell you how happy. I was very nervous before, but I'm not anymore because my friends are here. And Osgold, who I worked for at Agni 30 years ago in 93, I was saying, louder? Oh, I thought I was screaming. I feel very lucky to be in his life again. I feel very cared for. I want to thank the entire Arrowsmith team, who I can't remember all names, is Oswald and Kat and Ezra, who've done an amazing job and have become my friends, and thank God for them and what they care about. So the world's a dark place right now, and so I feel especially lucky. I mostly have poems about death and grief. So sorry. I'll try to read ekphrastic poems as well. But since I want to celebrate death, our life, not death, but I'm going to celebrate one death that was actually a good death by someone who lived a long life. And I'm going to remind us of what it was like in 2020 in April in New York City with this poem that Oscar quoted called "O Funeral Home in Queens." So this youngish guy was getting a lot of calls from very young people whose entire families were dying of COVID. And he ended up getting COVID, but he did funerals for all of them and went to the funerals with just them and the video. And so it was I read an article about him in the New York Times, and I got very moved, and I wrote this poem somehow, and I published it. And then turns out some magazine writer was writing an article about him, and then we sort of connected, and then we were all reading each other's words and listening to each other, which I thought was beautiful. Anyway, so this is a poem. By blood we go into the fabric of what once felt hymnal at worst. We are tuned to higher pitches now, in languages invented, not imagined rites of spring, but last rites in strange establishments. Trucks collect the dead and roll uptown to bury in a potter's field corpses we knew and loved, their long, solemn graves together. Better here than bodies shelved or stacked of flesh, shipped out of state to cremate or left to rot. We formalized obituaries. She was first to graduate. He escaped. She was a composer. He, though deaf, was a composer too. We pray alone to keep their souls alive until this month. We lived in adverbs, dressed for rainshine half the time, and not according to the daily toll, not this running tally at scale in every borough. Our minds are lost to gravity again. By gravity, we live. Fingerprint alone identifies us as one person in this widening morgue. You men and women of generations, ever upward, we say now. If Whitman could, he'd hold us dear. Our arms, our feet, our hands, our fingerprinted fingers wrapped in his myself disintegrated, everyone disintegrated, yet part of the scheme. And renew us with varied meanings, rebellious curiosities. I will miss him in my future, if it is me. And in 20 or 100 years, history will ask, how did we wear on with so much weeping? It was never so beautiful as this April in the park, with yellow oaks deliriously blooming despite the trill of siren after siren to the east. We ignored it, walking west or north, southeast, any which way someone else wasn't. Sunlight far flung itself sideways across the arms up Oaks and Olmsted's slopes. Oh, I was rapt, convinced that this surreal afternoon was magic cast in lavender, and grass green thickening itself. Cardinals flying straight up into that vanishing we are all doing now. Minding our unity, transcended both this, but cherish the eclipse. Our orbit moving over our polyphonic voices in fugue walking choices, prelude to nothing, yes, nothing, because when the wind is all C major, unraveling in D minor, we are in the neurobeat of wondering who will stay today and who departs tomorrow. But here are my children, my coffin, my love. It doesn't matter what color that coffin is, or that we swoon too long in idioms. We broke on counterpoint, and this is where it leads. I swear this is not my story. On our tombstones, what do we see? What we love most is always free and far irrational, fine with me. What is true today? If not my teeth, my bones, my nothingness, is it near? I must endear myself. I'll think, oh, it wasn't me. I was just a sentence after all. But my sentence, was it wrong? I am young to be this old, too old to be that young. When we are all accounted for, someone will surely say. Unevenly, I conclude, we count facts because we cannot lose our minds and facts. We lose them in the world, in the vivid air, thousands elsewhere. This is not a gloomy poem. I wrote it in Italy. You can't get gloomy in Italy. It's called Extended Melodies, about trying to write. I worked day, but nothing took. Not even thought would take a look. Not still the nothing that was me mattered much. Tuneless and multiple, free. I kept it up and orchestrated some ensembles. Cello, bird song, violin, auto-tuned it, added cymbals, and got the curve and ska of personality wrong. My pitch too wide, harmonically. Clatterings and shatterings, soundings universal escaped my ears. Pursuing joy, enjoying trouble. I hope that cheered you up a little. It's my one chance to be a singer. Okay, I'm going to read an ekphrastic poem since Steven just did. It's called Wilhelm de Kooning's Woman 1, about this beautiful painting at MoMA. I should have brought a picture. She's big and fierce. The canvas is giant, and I've been looking at this painting for many years, returning to MoMA to see it. He would paint it and then remove the paint and work on it again, and who knows how long it took, but it was at least several years. Again, that day when I drop everything and train at Midtown to see her, my still life mind eager for her distorted gloss of figuration, unfiguring herself, figuring out something else, beyond fieldscapes made of lines de Kooning puzzled out so long before he jigsawed them along the contours of a woman he refined, then scraped apart to reconstruct her once again. He'd volume up and messify the flatness of the modern, quick slashing strokes, so much encrusted paint her figure turned glyptic as he turned the art of painting intaglio, all the matrices and semi-precious colors defining her figure, defined so little that she recedes into the canvas as if engraved and remains below the lines, and curves of what we think a woman is. Some passers-by ooh, and then on closer look appear repulsed at this terrorizing doll of clashing lines and no perspective. But I see all the perspectives, all at once. If you construct a woman who refuses to cohere in an abstract field, there you'll find between her ribs, inside her claw-toothed mouth, behind many angled eyes forever open with surprise. It was never intaglio. He wanted only a progress, the daily work of working out what you care about most. I think he shaped a woman who was his in abstracted days ahead, for she inched her chair toward him as he approached her with his brushes, and she filled the frame. It seems unlikely either cared about sunlight, for he could complicate the colors and watch her illuminate within. Art can talk about love all it wants, but here is how to love. A rag-bone female abiding his work and still becoming. For even a paintbrush knows a woman has moving parts, glitter, bright plates, blue-green curves, and the uncoiling self, savage and feverish. Clearly, she believes in beauty she is a resemblance of. Okay, because Osgold is so incredibly kind, I am going to read a poem called Plum Cake, about a cake I did not make, for a woman who died at 87. She was the kindest person I'd ever met. She died in the middle of COVID. Oops, not of COVID. And she was one of those rare people who just distributed pleasure and happiness everywhere she went. And she was my ex-boyfriend from college's mother, and we stayed in touch my whole life. So, plum cake. I'd make a plum cake when she died. A lamentation grief bake, cottage through blood recipe, all of its colors shrieking at me, a sweet take on her love. I gaze at the street. Tree branches out front are tangled. My floor is rented. My house cage is so small and dark for all the summits, slopes, and swamps of feeling. I am not to be purple plum decided in any still life of grief or reminiscence. No wafer like religious feeling, never. She will never be human again. I knew I wouldn't make it. Italian plums are sweetest. I should find them in a market when days are longer. Fruit of aging, gift of goodness. A friend who lost a friend and made the cake said plum 6 times in one paragraph. So full of yearning are our phrases. Snow bright is her hair on the bed, knobby knuckle skin folded on her chest. She'd be delighted to celebrate her death. I love that, she'd say happily about the plum cake wake. Plums pooled around the cake slab in the photograph, bloody and marvelous. Skylight took her in. I couldn't make it. Thank you.
What a beautiful night. Only Askold could find a way to bring together Steven Cramer and Fresnel and me. We grew up in the same small town in New Jersey, not even a town really, population 1,350. And I met him through seeing him protest against the war in Vietnam and wrote a poem about it many years later. We didn't know that we grew up in the same town. I read that poem at Breadloaf. Stephen came up to me and said, I was one of the protesters. I could not have imagined at that time that I would spend so much of my adult life writing and thinking about war, but here we are. And it's just glorious to listen to Diane read. She promised us that she would sing a little bit today, and I think we can all agree her voice is amazing. So in 2006, I got an email from someone at the State Department. I direct the International Writing Program, which is funded largely by grants from the State Department. And the subject line said, "Call me about your trip to Kiev." So I called him and I said, what trip to Kiev? Or in those days, we pronounced it Kiev. And he said, well, you're leaving in 3 days. And I said, nobody said anything to me about a trip to Kiev. This is what came from that. I was thinking in this, it's a book-length poem, which begins in an unheated van, and which was so cold that the only way I could stop from shaking was to start trying to write some notes about what I was seeing along the way, driving from Kiev to Lviv, in what was then the coldest winter in memory, in an unheated van, with a Foreign Service national, that would be a local staff member, who was clearly going through menopause. And each time she had a hot flash, she would roll the window down. And I was in the back with a Ukrainian novelist, very small, a petite woman, and we were so cold that we took all of our clothes out of our suitcases and duffel bags and covered ourselves to try to stay warm. That's where the poem began, and then it goes on. So I'll just read some of it. The globes of mistletoe in the bare trees, in an irradiated area west of Kiev, a silent colony of children signing prayers in unison, and gloveless women hauling sleds of kindling along the icy path to the soccer pitch on which the SS shot the Jews, and murders of crows clearing the road of carrion, save for the wolf splayed on a drift of snow. The miles unroll in an unheated van past wheat fields, woods, and telephone poles topped with empty storks' nests spreading out like mitres. In every village there is a new church, crowned with a green dome, onion-shaped and layered with murals of the Savior resurrected beyond the statues of the fallen order, of planes and tanks, of a seminarian scorned by his classmates and a novelist crippled in the Great War, of the Red Rider spurring his horse to fly toward a ladder nailed to a cross outside a cemetery embellished with blue, green, and orange banners, then castles, cattails, and horse-drawn carriages in which the children huddle under sheepskins, and a pack of stray dogs loping across the road, and tractor trailers sliding down the hill. So much for gauging what a traveler from the Imperium can document with his own eyes at 30 miles an hour. O fickle muse of history, I cannot imagine or invent lives for the peasants glimpsed in the dream of war and independence. Somebody must repair the train, the bridge, and the iconostasis to the statue of the Virgin in a village cleansed of its original inhabitants, where a peasant arguing with a young priest over the deed to the cathedral raises his fists, and the barracks empty at daybreak, a scene derived from a 19th century novel, refracted through a diplomatic lens. Why are we driving to the western border, not to Odessa, birthplace of the brilliant Anna Akhmatova and Isaac Babel? Natalia, the Foreign Service national, who rolls her window down with each hot flash and will not roll it up again until I cloak myself with clothes from my duffel bag, ignores all questions deemed political, including venues, meals, accommodations, and Russia's near abroad, i.e., Crimea, the Baltics, Belarus, and anywhere one Russian nationalist can be found. The Kremlin promises a military and technical alternative if Ukraine refuses to kowtow to Russian demands to sign away its own security and by extension the West's raison d'etre, ideals, and democratic rhetoric. Only a fool or traitor would support surrendering without firing a shot, and we are flush with both like every nation. Pity the scholar who cannot imagine why Russian hypersonic carrier killers may be unleashed in a first strike, and if it is, a military planner schooled in the Kremlin strategy explains, then it will be game over for the West and possibly all of civilization. Nor can I fathom what our mission is, since cultural diplomacy is not easily defined. And so I turn again to Adam Zagajewski's poem, recounting an imaginary journey to his birthplace, Lviv, in what was once Poland, then Soviet Ukraine, and now an independent country in the crosshairs of irredentist Russian politicians and democratic Westerners like me, who are determined to develop civil societies around the world, utopians, in other words, who may wreak havoc in a quest to undermine the power of authority to take what their people must believe in order to survive. Impossible, of course. Yet here I am, east of Lviv, with my teeth chattering and my divided heart, imagining scenarios in which I do not have to risk my life to satisfy the foreign policy imperatives of a regime at war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other lands which rarely merit mention in the news. When Zagajewski read at Vilenica, this is a festival in Slovenia, in the courtyard of a medieval castle that fell to ruin long ago, to the poets seated beneath a chestnut tree, which rained ripe chestnuts on their heads at intervals no one could time, their attention may have wandered, for they kept looking up as if in prayer, since poetry is prayer. This festival in the karst region of Slovenia brought kindred spirits from around the world to revel in the word made manifest. Here in the courtyard and later in a cave, the organizers called their tectonic cathedral. Say amen to the poets then, who savor a blaze of words under the chestnut tree. The poet's death on the spring equinox in the pandemic's second year begat the usual encomia, reminding readers of his translated work in English to try to praise the mutilated world, as he did after 9/11, when all too many of my countrymen considered that impossible. They still do. The Russian occupation of Crimea, the war in Donbass, and the mercenaries gathering on the border with Ukraine to join the Russian forces awaiting orders to march on Kyiv and retake what some believe is their ancestral home, their Rus. These threats to peace in Europe will continue until the strong man in the Kremlin dies, or so the commentariat declares. This is the sort of speculation poets generally avoid. Particulars are what command attention in a workshop, as in wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine, and strict attention to the prosodical demands of the form, traditional or free, the poet chooses to explore the diction employed, the range of reference, the patterns of imagery, the vocal registry, all count in the performance of the poem, which may survive as long as the language does. It's pretty grim stuff, isn't it? Askold published this week in the New Yorker the most beautiful translation of Shevchenko, the great Ukrainian poet. So I'll read just this little section, not from his translation, but from another poem. The sandbags piled around the monument in Kharkiv to Taras Shevchenko, poet and founder of a literature and language the Russians firing at the city do not believe exists, are testimony to some of the ways in which poetic logic can shape experience for generations unconsciously, surviving in a turn of phrase, a cadence, or an adage passed along in pillow talk and argument between a couple headed for divorce, a week before their neighbors went to war, against a ghostly nation resurrected in verse. A black cloud hid a cloud of white. Long variation, the chess master said, when Russian missiles struck apartment buildings in Kharkiv and Kyiv. Wrong variation. The vaunted escalation dominance possessed by a decrepit military was nowhere to be seen, astute observers whispered to colleagues in the halls of power. The shelling of another hospital or TV tower prompted denunciations, more offers to supply Ukrainians with advanced weaponry, and yet more reasons, costs, risks to put off taking the decision to intervene, igniting World War III, according to an elder statesman praised for his sagacity. Yet others thought the war had started with the Russian incursion into Georgia in August 2008, or else its occupation of Crimea in 2014. And while decision makers in Washington and Brussels stalled for time, Ukrainian civilians died in droves. Meanwhile, these crimes against humanity perplexed a conscript from Siberia who could not bring himself to shoot his foes because his mother was Ukrainian. Thus, a freelance journalist imagined what his translator had gleaned from listening to radio transmissions from the front. For this was what he always wanted to hear. Historians revise, the sage explained, and journalists revere. The fixer knew he could not translate Russian views of God into an idiom the journalist might comprehend, and so he remained silent about the last words of the last transmission. This special military operation, blessed by the Patriarch of the Third Rome and sanctified by the God of gods, will cleanse the empire of its undesirables and usher in 1,000 years of peace for all who kneel before our mother Russia. The journalist would tip him handsomely. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you so much to our readers. Fabulous readings. I have one more order of business tonight, and that is to announce the recipient of the Derek Walcott Prize. This is a prize given annually by Arrowsmith Press in conjunction with Derek's daughters, Anna and Lizzie. The prize comes with a $2,000 cash award, and this year's judge was the St. Lucian poet Canisia Lubrin, who herself had received the prize a couple of years ago. And she just emailed us her decision and short citation a couple of days ago, so this is brand new. I just have to say also, I'm so glad to see so many of Derek's old friends and former students in the audience tonight as well. We're just 2 blocks away from the theater that he launched here some 35 or so years ago. The Boston Playwrights Theater is still going strong. And I also want to thank my colleagues and old friends, Kate Snodgrass and Jacob Stratman, for helping me to winnow down the 100+ books all around the world. The prize is given for a book of poetry published by a non-US citizen in any language, so they're books in translation. This is a Canisia's citation. She selected for the prize the first book by a young poet from Gaza, Moussa Abu Toha. The book is titled Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear, published by City Lights. It was also the recipient of the American Book Award this past year. Here is a book which reveals at an impossible pitch the potent will to live, heart first, in confrontation with life under brutal siege. Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear is a supertonic glossary of sorrows so extreme it bends the brace of language into fortifying, never naive elegy. Toha's meticulous and often brief lines thread his own breathing witness into a poetry of mighty resolve, insisting poetry itself be worthy of a Palestinian lament. Toha insists on these songs, holding each by their own powerful weight and bond into this rippling of a future out beyond the page. This is a work of great restraint and abundant attention, presented as always waiting in the routine arrangements of the day-to-day. Such grace and understanding, daring because necessary, necessary because how powerful it is to hear a voice cut so sharply through the day. So haunting, so searing, and above all, so lit by Moussa Abu Toha's vibrant, what else to call it, love. It's the end of the citation. And I just want to mention that Musab, his family, and 3 children have been sheltering in Jabalia, the refugee camp in Gaza, which was so heavily shelled in the last few days. And I encourage you, those of you who are so inclined, to say a prayer or a mantra for Musab and his family. Thank you so very much for coming out this evening. Thank you to all the readers. And now this is the moment where you honor the readers by buying numerous copies of their books. Thank you. Thank you. Beautifully done. Beautifully done.